Ajay Argal, Head of India Equities and Chief Investment Officer Asia with Bearing Asset Management, joins us live. Ajay, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Ajay, from your perspective, the important clarification which came from the Finance Ministry on Friday during the market hour on the Mauritius issue, is that good enough?
Yeah, I think so. It is good enough. The foreign institutional investors are really want clarity and transparency on the entire issue, and I think that is what has come about.
Many experts on Thursday were of the view that the reason why markets fell on Thursday was because of confusion on this entire Mauritius tax issue. So to your mind, if clarification has come on that, how come markets never recovered on Friday?
I don't know about the short-term movements. There are a lot of issues at the moment in the markets. Primary is the state of the economy, and as we saw, the GDP numbers were not very encouraging, below 5%. So obviously that also does kind of have an impact on the market. So the market is not only looking at very short-term issues, looking at longer term, whether the bottom is formed, whether there is any recovery. So you have to look at all those things in figuring out. And in the short term, the markets anyway can move up and down also in relation to where the global markets are.
Ajay, talking about the macro picture, what were your views on the budget, and were you disappointed with the fact that there was nothing really talked about in terms of how the finance minister is going to instill growth into the economy?
I think budget is an exercise on accounting, and we should take it that way. Definitely, it is not the only document or the only action point for the government. The government can do a lot of action outside the budget, which it has demonstrated over the last few months, and it happens all the time. So it might be a bit unfair to look at budget only from that perspective, and it is anyway a dynamic world. It's not a static scenario, and budget is just a snapshot at that particular point in time, and as things change, the actions from the government can also change. So we are not that much focused on the budget from that perspective. Only the intent was very important, that the government is looking to curb the fiscal deficit, and that's a very good starting point.
So Ajay, between growth and a strong fiscal deficit number, ultimately what do you think markets will give more importance to? Because India has had high fiscal deficit for 4 or 5 years, and despite a high fiscal deficit number, foreign institutional investors have still invested in India.
Right. So it's not either or, it's a combination of both. So we definitely want growth, and you want a lower fiscal deficit. Obviously, the two are not hand in hand together. So if you have a lower fiscal deficit, then you might have an impact on the GDP number, which we saw in the last quarter, because you have the government curbing the expenditure, which gets reflected in the GDP number. So the foreign investors are looking at longer term, 12 to 18 month perspective, whether the economy is bottoming out, whether it is recovering, and also the foreign investors are looking at in relation to the other economies. So India is not a standalone economy which is slowing down. There is a slowdown around the world. So in relative terms, whether the slowdown is more or less, and whether the slowdown is getting stopped, or it is continuing, or it is aggravating. So it is all those issues which the foreign investors have in mind before or when they decide to put in money in various markets. So from that perspective, India is slowed down, but we have seen slowdown around the world. So that's why you see a lot of money still coming into India.
So what could be the biggest risk to the FII inflows right now, Ajay? Any tailwinds, both domestic or global?
I think from a domestic perspective, definitely the investors are watching the political scenario, and if there is political uncertainty going forward in relation to when the elections would be held, or whether the elections are being held earlier than anticipated, that could have an impact on the foreign flows. And outside India, it also has an impact on what is the risk appetite, risk environment globally. If there is a tremendous risk of environment for whatever reason, whether there is some issues in the US, or whether there is the resurfacing of the old issues in Europe, if there is a risk of environment, then also could have an impact on the fund flows coming into India.
So Ajay, are you using the current market decline to your advantage to add more? Last time when we interacted, you were fully invested. Your preferred spots were banking, and within the banking space, you were a big fan of the private banking space.
Yes, we continue with the same approach, and we are generally almost fully invested most of the time because that's what our mandate is. We continue our bias towards private sector banks. We also like a few pockets. Since the economy is not doing well, there is not too much of trends. But one trend clearly visible is that there is digitization in the media space. So we are liking that space, and we are hugely overweight there. And similarly, we have talked even in the past about secular growth in the pharmaceutical space, both the domestic pharma market as well as the US generic market, and the companies catering to that area in India. So the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmaceutical sector is another area where we are overweight.
We're on the global setting right now, and what risks do you see to the current risk-on rally which is prevalent?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there are various data points which the global investors are continuously watching. So what is the state of the US economy? What is happening to the cuts there? Is it going to have a major impact on the consumption pattern there? What's happening on the European side? We have seen the election results in Italy. So there the politics is very important, and whether the politicians there are able to hold the euro together. So those are the things which the investors are watching there. In Japan, again, the investors are looking as to what are the policies of the new governor who is coming in terms of the currency there, and what specific buying which assets is he going to do, so to figure out what kind of impact on the currency that might be there. So all these things would have an impact on what is the risk on environment globally.